Hello, friends. Here we are again, lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Correll, and I have with me today my good buddy Ken Caputo. And I think those of you who have tuned us in before, we're up over 110 episodes at this point. You know what we're all about. We use language and really get into the weeds a little bit to see if there's empowerment underneath conversation, underneath the words and intentions, and how to take the time every day and take care of yourself. So if we're getting our job done, then we're feeling the empowerment first, and then you get to feel the empowerment when you listen. So today, at the top of my head, Ken, is two words. I'm thinking uh, partnership and community. And whether we've discussed them before or not, I think is probably secondary because our conversations always go wherever they go, right?
Yep.
So if I mention partnership and community to you, Ken, what do you come away with?
Yeah. Quester's way. It's no, it's funny. I mean, that's I guess for me, it's kind of that's been an underlying theme throughout my entrepreneurial life.
Sure.
Is finding basically creating environments where healthy partnerships can flourish and doing it in a way that adds value to the community and all the parts of the community. The people, the resources, the support network, all those things. So yeah, but it's an interesting language. I mean, we think in terms of, even if you're going to hire someone, it's a partnership, like a true partnership, as opposed to what are they going to get from you or what are you going to get from them. It's, you know truly looking at it through the lens of how can we work together to produce an agreed upon result.
Yeah, there's an interesting part of that if you're developing a partnership with an intention to synergize, it's quite different than developing a partnership to where I hand off my responsibility and give it to you, and then I don't worry about it anymore. You know,
Mhm.
and there are a lot of business models where that's the case. There are people who operate in silos or bubbles, and if it's not on their table, it's not their responsibility, and they cease giving it any further energy. But we often start off talking about the definitions of these words, right? So let's go and take a look and see what the dictionary is saying. We'll do community first. It's interesting because of the way that community gets used, and in many cases, it gets used for a purpose, like a tool. So um, I'm looking at the dictionary.com definition: a social group of any size whose members reside in a specific locality. They share government and often have a common cultural and historical heritage. A locality inhabited by such a group, a social, religious, occupational, or other group sharing common characteristics or interests and perceived or perceiving itself as distinct in some respect from the larger society within which it exists. So I think that's probably the one where I think it gets used and misused the most, where people talk in generalities about, this community or that community, like they all have this common core and are thinking, at the base of everything exactly alike, and they all follow the same mores and rules and what have you. And nothing could be further than the truth. When you look at the community as you were describing it, it's all of the people that are involved with all of it. And the people who interact with you and me on a daily basis, they're our community. They're the ones who are imprinting and saying things to us that we're thinking about it. We're sharing energy and smiles and love and all that sort of thing. And it has rarely anything to do with either our cultural background or our skin color or anything of that nature. That's what other people who want to do the reporting will use to classify us so that they can make generalities about all the people in that group. You know what I mean? Like the martial arts community, Ken? Like you guys all think alike, right?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I guess it's a good point because really you're talking a community is just a group of people that are sharing a space. So that space could be in an industry, it could be geographic, it could be values, it could be gender or race or ideals, could be anything. So I guess the question becomes, what's the context? So there is a martial arts community. To me, a functioning community is one where the diversity is accepted and we look for the common core that we all share. So, and that's where, you'll have tension created when, someone in the martial arts community is like, if it doesn't work in the street, you're not teaching martial arts, or if it's not 1,000 years old, it's not legitimate, or, whatever it is. So, so you have that part where there's going to be tension created, but it's still a community. It's just not uh, functioning that healthily. So and then you get other people who have, they lead with curiosity and they're like, that's interesting. I have a lot of conversations with martial artists about what they value in martial arts, and you know and how clear are they on defining that value in a way that they're teaching students who align with those values. you know so I mean, if someone wants to come into our dojo and they want their kid to start getting punched in the head really hard to toughen them up, we refer them out to a different school where those values are something that they prioritize, because we just don't. And we're not judging it. We're not saying, I mean, if you feel that that's what your child needs, we're just being clear that that's not, one of the parameters of how our school operates and functions. We just choose not to have that element. So, you know,
And I think what you're saying is really powerful because I believe that people choose their community by the time that they spend. And just to say that people with similar interests are part of a community without interviewing them and asking them what they really are interested in, that's sloppy as far as I'm concerned. I think it takes no thinking at all to group people according to outward appearance or the language they speak or something of that nature. And nothing could be further from the truth. You've got a bell curve within any group that you have along any line that you want to measure. People who are in the middle of the curve in one set of questions are going to be at the high end of the curve in another set of questions. So to group them together by the least important attribute, which is how they look to you, or the person who's saying what that community is, it's more, a tool to be used in terms of making a point for which there is no data available, but you're going to use. But we all know what that community is and how they operate and who they are, and likely we don't. And people just don't question it all that often.
yeah, and and it's kind of interesting because I mean, where your center of gravity is as far as how important is it that other people accept your view of the community, that's going to have some impact on your your interaction with the community as a whole. So sticking with martial arts, if you believe everything needs to be combat oriented, that's going to put you into a smaller wedge of that community that you have agreement with. So you may actually kind of insulate yourself from a larger part of the community because you just don't believe they even belong in the community.
Right.
But it's too bad. They're in the community whether you want them there or not. You don't get to decide that. You can try to throw them out, but but all you're going to do is continue to create tension for yourself and the people that you're injecting that on. So it's kind of interesting, for some people there's this level of protection based around, they fiercely defend what they believe that community to represent to them, and then others are more open and they're just looking for that common narrative. Like, what's the thing that we can all agree to, we can all rally around. Like, every martial artist, if you ask them, is the martial arts something that's valuable for people to learn, can it be helpful in their life, and you don't give it any more context, anyone that believes in the martial arts is going to say yes. We can all agree to that. So now, how you feel it has value, that's gonna we're gonna start to see the splintering. It's purely for self defense. It's for wellness. It's for I don't know, getting better grades. It's for making a better family. Whatever. There's all these divergencies, but in the end, there is a core there. So I guess that's again, you're back to I just keep coming to the word context because I think that's where there's a lot of disruption in the concept of community right now is the context we're operating under, you know?
Yes, and people are misusing the word, in my opinion. If you and I were to say that we both live in zip code 06226, well, we could describe that as a community that's irrefutable. We don't have to have met everybody in that zip code in order to be part of that particular type of community. But now, when
Right.
you get inside of that community and you start talking about the Episcopalians, or you start talking about the people that are, Lions or members of Rotary, or
Mhm.
all the rest of it, the word community starts to break down in terms of calling groups of people that share an interest, and especially if it goes outside of the ones where they have opted in, where they've joined, they've said, I am part of the Episcopal Church, right?
Mhm.
As opposed to non-practicing Episcopalians who have left the church, that you won't know who they are. But will they still conform to somebody else's view of what Episcopalians are? I don't think so. I think the
Yeah.
other person's view is the least important, and they're the ones who have to create this generality. You and I both know that generalities are generally false, right? So,
Mhm.
but they have to say, because we form our thoughts and our logic, if A and B, then C, right? So if you say that people that are in this community, by and large, seem to believe whatever, then you can now project. And if that's true, then they also believe this, which is nothing more than creating a fabricated virtual set of logic that has absolutely no value in the world. It's just conditioning people's thinking so that they're susceptible to the next thought that basically says, well, if you stayed with me up to that point and I haven't lost you yet, I can now project, how evil they are, or I can now project how right they are, that they're the best people on the planet. And unfortunately, when it comes down to like measuring it against an individual who just might be a martial artist but doesn't believe in any of this other stuff that they're talking about as they're spinning a narrative, that community in fact does not exist. It's just something that they made up in speech so they could make a point and persuade. And that comes down to the general misuse of our language these days, generally. Okay. And the reason I
Yeah.
say that is because if you look at journalism and what journalism used to mean when you and I were young, that was something to aspire to, to be the next Edwin R. Uh, Edward R. Murrow, or to be the next Walter Cronkite. These were things that people valued and they trusted, right? There was a whole, generally, again, it's going to be a bell curve with people who abuse that privilege and people who honor it to the point where they would never say anything that they did not know to be factual. And that's turned into who can be the most outrageous and get the most clicks on the internet. So the concern that I have, and what I want to represence here, if you will, is that community at its purest level is not necessarily a group of people who think alike or act alike or look alike. What if it's just the people you run into on a daily basis that before you saw that person, your life was operating one way? And after you have that interaction with that person, even if you're just picking up the dry cleaning, and that
Mhm.
older woman hands you, your freshly ironed shirts and everything, and smiles at you and says, "How's your granddaughter doing?" You know, or "How's that daughter of yours doing? Is she still out in Denver?" I walked through that kind of an experience, and I don't remember what I was thinking about before I walked in there. Do you know what I mean, Ken?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Uh, so it's interesting. I had a couple thoughts. One was a book by Seth Godin called "We Are All Weird," and
Yes.
it's a great book. He wrote it quite a few years ago, and the he says objects in the mirror are weirder than they may appear. And
Yes.
the analogy he uses, he says, imagine that you see someone, you're driving and you see someone on the side of the road running, but they're really far away. So probably everyone right now listening, you could probably create like your concept of what a runner looks like, and maybe it's someone that's, very thin or very fit, or, like there's some kind of, you know, construct that you have. So, and then in the book, he says, but as you get closer, all of a sudden, you realize this is a 300-pound man gasping for air, limping along in a pair of jeans, that kind of thing, where
Yeah.
they don't fit your preconceived notion. And his message is everyone is, we're all weird, and we only look like that construct of community from a distance. So as you get closer, that changes. Now, for me, the thing that was interesting about that is, what is the question or statement that follows your recognition of a disconnect between your belief of what someone who belongs to the running community looks like or behaves like, compared to the fact that here is someone that has selected themselves into the running community, right? So a lot of people, if they saw that, they'd be like, "Oh my God, that's not, he shouldn't be running. Oh my God, this guy's crazy," right? They would reject them, right? And other people would say, "Wow, good for him. There's someone who's, joined this community, and they're looking for a way to, to take space in that community, right? And they don't fit the mold that I have, but isn't that cool? My perspective has now been expanded to
Hmm.
include someone that I didn't think previously could be included, right? So, so really now it comes down to, there's it's just this interesting thing. So it's now the question becomes, how do you respond when your concept of community is challenged by someone who's chosen to select themselves into that community? They've moved in, and they start hanging flags that are different from the flags other people in the community. How do you respond to that? Is it they don't belong here, or is it what brought them here? Is it curiosity, or is it rigidity, inflexibility? So so that kind of struck me. And the other thing that struck me was allowing community concept to be flexible. So for example, in Quester's Way, we talk about the five circles, right? And the largest circle are guests. Anyone that walks in the door, they are a guest. They are not our customer. That we use the term guest very intentionally. So, and then there's a circle inside of that where they become students. They start actually taking classes. They engage actively in learning. Not everybody does that, but they can all be part of the Quester's Way community, right? But there's an inner community, and then there's the navigators who've adopted the idea of move, think, connect, fuel, and power as regular practices to better their lives. And then from inside of there's a tribe, and they're the ones who are pretty heavily involved. Like they're doing all kinds of different things. They're regularly there, and then at the center is the village, and they're the ones that are actively protecting, promoting, supporting, sustaining. Usually, they're people that work or act as if they work, in the center. So there's these five rings. They're all part of a greater community, but there's like these sub identifications within it that people would flow in and out of based on the context of their individual lives. So, so you could have someone like, when I join a community, I want to invest in the community, my time and my services and my expertise. Other people join the community and they want to be left alone. Are they less of a community member because they want to be left alone? Or have they just identified a way to participate that's different from the way I choose to? Who am I to judge it? And who are they to judge me? Right. So it's like this flexible range is the thing that kind of struck me about it.
So the interesting thing is that the mind power in terms of having an interpretation of the size and the shape of the community such that when somebody else joins it, that it either changes that shape and it becomes, bigger, or it invalidates whatever the community values were held prior to that person coming in and being a transformer, you know? And
Yeah.
the really interesting part of that for me is at some point when you start to move in closer, as you mentioned, you start to wonder whether or not the definition around communities is valid. I mean, what's the use of it?
Mm.
I mean, there are things in the world, there are tools that are there that have no use. Their purpose is neither good nor bad. And it all
Mm.
depends on if I hand you a hammer, what you do with that hammer is, your action is what's going to dictate whether or not that's acceptable or unacceptable. And the whole idea and notion of the word community and the notion that people with some kind of commonality, either geographic or their thinking and ideology and all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that you can group people who haven't given you permission to group them. That to
Mm.
me, I think is the most ridiculous thing. And the reason that they're being grouped by the other people is to make it easier to train a listener how to handle the recognition of that community in the future now that it's been defined by somebody who is not a member of that community. And that's where suspicion, it needs to come into play. And it also comes full circle back to the word partnership. And I think
Mm.
that the word partnership, as you described with your 5 rings, and that inside of each different ring, interesting to me how people select themselves in and out of that, or do the peers select them, or do you know what I'm saying? Because
Mhm.
everyone can walk in and get there a guest. That's cool.
Mhm.
And so then you get to the next place, and then to the tribe, and to the ha and the ha. But
Mhm.
what is the process for that community to become a better defined subset of the grander community of all guests? So that's interesting. That's not going to be described by somebody outside that community, in my opinion. I think that's, coming down to that definite, level of these are the things that we now share that are higher and more senior conversations than the guests at large would either appreciate or enjoy. And they're there for us because it helps us describe our commitment to service and our commitment to other
Mhm.
human beings that we may or may not even know. So those are really cool things, and those are where you start get to the ladder of partnership. And the first
Mhm.
one is where you share a positive idea of the future with somebody without necessarily any total commitment to go and make it happen yet, right? But you do believe that there is something possible, that if more work were to be put into it and more discipline in terms of going through the actions to accomplish it. And I kind of hear those steps in what you were describing with your 5 circles, which I think is very, very distinct, and it communicates
Well,
very well.
yeah, and I think that that's, I think a lot of what you're speaking to is it's clarity of values. Like I'll give you for example, we would have people would come into Quester's Way, and it was polarizing. Like for example, I can remember an adult very upset that we didn't sell soda and in the cafe. We just wanted to focus on as best we could healthy choices. There's no alcohol, there is no soda, and they're like, I want soda, and we're like, we're sorry, I mean, that is not something that we carry here. We have these other options. Soda is not one of them. These are carbonated, they're soda like, but there's less sugar, blah 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 blah. And they're like, that is ridiculous, I will take my business elsewhere. And our response to that was, have a nice day. And
Yes.
to which they got even more upset, because who are you to tell me that I can't have soda here if I want it? So because their mindset is their their needs supersede the clearly stated values of that community. They disagreed. We'd have people who disagreed with the fact that they couldn't leave their child in the indoor park and go away. They had to stay and supervise their child. We weren't childcare, you know. So, and of course, we're staff, but we expect them to stay on site. So, so any community is going to have pockets of tension created by people who are dissatisfied with the values or the design of the community they're joining, you know?
Right.
And so now as long as you're clear, what we found this with the dojo for years too. If people came in and the our clarity of values wasn't what they were looking for, they would quickly leave. And we would, respectfully thank them for giving us a try and
Yeah.
encourage them to leave, so that our community more and more reflected people who shared those values. And we also had people who came in who were resistant to them, but stayed anyway because they wanted to be part of it. And we found a way to coexist. And they were never quite as involved, and there'd be periodic tension. But as long as that was handled respectfully and they weren't damaging the experience of the group, their individualism was expressed in a non-harmful way, it was fine, you know? So, but the other thing I think that's interesting is people who've never experienced that community, of course, they're going to have their idea of what it is. And some people are very comfortable talking about things they're unfamiliar with. Let them talk, and generally speaking, if they show up, that'll change their perspective, or they'll leave having built a narrative that allows them to hold on to the perspective they wanted to hold. But why should the community care? I mean, as long as they're not actively breaking it down, what's it matter?
Well, and that's a really good point because almost without exception, every organization that was complex in terms of those values, in terms of the mores, where you couldn't walk in and immediately know, like in a swimming pool, if the lifeguard whistles, you get out of the pool. Okay,
Yeah.
everybody got that. Short of that, there's no running. There's no throwing objects, and that's it.
Mm.
Let's all go have a good swim now. But any other more complex set of trainings, if you will,
Hmm.
or even a church environment or a social club or something of that nature, there's always people coming in and saying, "Well, why don't you do it this way?"
Hmm.
And the answer is because we do it this way. The club you're looking for is meeting somewhere else.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is not that club. But almost everybody comes in with an intention of using their experience to to upgrade and make the experience better for other people because they know what's better, right? And in many cases they do. And the community is strong enough in its fabric that it resists those types of challenges. However, when an idea is good enough, and that's usually when roughly 10% of the people agree that there's a change that's necessary, then that starts the process for that change to take effect. And if it's a healthy community, then it's one that has a process for effecting that change without the tension, removing people, and half the group going and doing something completely different. So that's an interesting thing. And I also
Actually, can I say just one thing that just struck me with that? Because you're right, you can kind of absorb that value, but you'll also have the few that don't want it to change because they just don't want it to change.
yes,
When I expanded out of my first dojo, it was this
yep.
tiny space we had outgrown with smelly carpet, and we moved into a space that was twice as large and cleaner and more modern. I had people quit because it didn't feel like the old space and they were uncomfortable. And they said, "This is better. My kids have more room. The lobby is so much nicer." They knew all of the value, but they just weren't comfortable with the change. So no
Yeah.
matter what you do, you will have the people that they they want to live like it was the 50s still because that's what they remember as being a highlight in their life or whatever decade, pick a decade, So, or the the town has changed. They paved that road, or that favorite old mom and pop shop is gone, or whatever it is, and it doesn't matter how much value is absorbed in that replaces it. It's different, and that's the problem. So you have to kind of accept that. I mean,
Yeah, the whole notion. of managing change such that everyone has an opportunity to healthily opt in or opt out. And in many cases, people will not appreciate or like a change, but because they've been involved in the change process, will give it a shot, and they will give
Mm,
themselves a
yeah.
chance to come around to it, as opposed to coming in and showing up and everybody's being told, "We're no longer meeting here anymore. Our new address is over here. We'll see you there in a little while." Like, what? You know? But if you had, people out looking for space together, coming back, sharing what they found with other people so that folks are starting to look at, the change as being something that's an upgrade in the process and is intended to do that, then there's a completely different reception to it. And all of that byplay and all of that inclusion is what I say is a healthy partnership. the, the
Hmm.
the notion of people making a decision to do something together, which is either going to be a social contract, or in cases of business where you and I sit down and we sign an agreement to form an LLC and our names go on the bottom of it. That's an agreement to be partners. And in a lot of cases, people just don't have a healthy notion of partnership. They don't have it in their marriages. They don't have it with their children. They don't have it with the service people in their lives. Not a partnership for many people. When they show up and things don't go bad or don't go good, then they take it out on the person who's unfortunate enough to be delivering that service, as if they were intentionally trying to, give you a bad day. And the notion of partnership inside of community is very powerful because it's a lever that allows a little bit of energy to produce tremendous results. The whole synergy equation, which is, 2 plus 2 not equaling 4 or 1, because in a lot of cases 2 plus 2 does not equal 1 or 2 or 3 in the real world. In a synergistic relationship, 2 plus 2 can be 27, you know and it's like, this quantum leap. It's like you went through a wormhole and came out someplace completely different. And trying to understand what that process was that allowed all the stars and planets and energy to line up so that you could have this amazing outcome, I think that's the magic of being in a relationship where uh, productivity and creation and invention are all, those are the watchwords, where we're not coming in and doing the same thing over and over again by rote. We're actually working together and leveraging each other's smarts and energy and love to produce some sort of a future outcome that's, in current terms is indescribable. And then once you get to that place, you won't even remember what it was like before that transformation occurred.
Mhm.
So if we looked, into our community, and again, not groups of people that agree on something and that makes them there, I don't think there's any binding contract just because people say the same things. You know what I mean? But when people say we're going to build a world that works, for example, that's a contract that I think anybody who wants to live a life that's worth living, um, they can immediately either sign on to or say that's not for me.
Mhm.
And the whole notion of
Yeah.
opting in, I think, is very powerful. What can I count on you for? What can you count on me for? And if I'm not delivering on that, or you seem to think I'm not delivering on that, how are we going to handle that? How are we going to remind each other
Mhm.
of this unbelievable future that you and I are creating, that is a complete impossibility, but we're doing it anyway?
Mhm. It's funny, as you're talking, I was kind of reflecting on the fact that communities and partnerships are you're sipping from broken cups, and I think for me, I would forget the impermanence of all those things. Like any partnership, e eventually it will end. It's just it is not forever, and, death is inevitable if nothing else.
Yeah.
So, but, situations change, we change, so communities shift. So it's this interesting thing where I think when I was younger, I would create this kind of eternal expectation of the partnership like it was a fixed value, and that can really lead to a lot of problems because now rather than recognizing, okay, we had an agreement and now what we have is a disagreement because we evolved beyond, outgrew, or are no longer interested in the agreement that we made. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, a pair of jeans from high school. I mean, even if you still fit in them, would you want to wear them? Yeah. Would it feel right anymore? Does that mean there's something wrong with you? Is there something wrong with the jeans? No, it's just the impermanence of everything around us. So I wonder if some of the difficulties people feel with either a fear of entering into a community or partnership, or recognizing that it isn't what they thought it was, or it's no longer what it used to be, is that just our own difficulty with resolving ourselves with a paradoxical nature of, our present moment and the impermanence of, you know, the future moments, you know?
It's a completely remarkable thing to take a look at, and you're absolutely right. Most people are so um, unfamiliar with creating a functional partnership. They mostly do it out of need. It's like you possess some
Yeah.
skills that I don't have, and I believe you can do X, Y, and Z, which may or not be true, right? So the really neat part of people who have experience in creating partnerships is they create an off ramp before we get started. If things are not working out, here's how we're going to resolve it. These are the things that we will build into that, because the fact of the matter is, whenever you try something, there's three outcomes. You get what you intended, you fail at getting what you intended, or you don't realize that you failed in the past and it's not working anymore. Those are like three different things that can happen. I'm sure there are more, but nobody ever talks about that one where it's not working. You
Mhm.
know, when you get an outright failure, which means you go to write a check and there's no money in the bank account, that's a failure that everyone can agree on. And now we need to go try something else because we can't put food on the table, right? But how about you got just enough money where nobody's really getting what they need, and it's clearly not working, but everyone wants to believe if someone tries harder, or if we all try harder, or whatever that is, that the effort's just not there, and if we give it the college try, and not taking a hard look at, are the fundamentals in place for this equation to ever yield more than 1 plus 1 equals a half, or 1 plus 1 equals
Yeah.
one and
Yeah.
a half. So I think the neat part of looking at partnership, to me, when people opt into a partnership like a marriage where you make vows and you say, this is what I intend to do, I think there's an unfortunate ease of getting into it, and there's a stigma with getting out of it. And I'm not talking in specific now. I'm stepping back and I'm basically saying, interesting to me, why is it that 3 out of 4 marriages are now going to end up in failure? And why is it that most people who get married one time and get divorced one time will probably be married to 3 different people during their lifetime? And some of these other truisms, and
Mhm.
statistics that they're coming up with. And it makes you wonder if the partnership game is broken, or if people's understanding of partnership isn't what it used to be, because there were generations of people who never even met the person they were going to spend their whole rest of their life with. It
Mhm.
was arranged by their parents when they were very, very small, and then when it came, they didn't quit because their culture was so strong and their community was so strong. You don't do that around here. So
Mhm.
people would live their lives in misery when the right thing
Yeah.
for them to
Yeah.
do was to get a damn divorce. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
then you see the people that are, I like to call them, frequent and repetitive offenders, where they get married 6, 7, 8, 9 times, in their lifetime. And I remember, Liz, what's her name? White Diamonds, National Velvet. Uh, Liz, you know who I'm talking about. She said,
Yeah, yeah.
I love getting married. Okay. Seven marriage partners in her lifetime. And what a wonderful woman, had a really healthy view of it. It'll be good while it's good. And then when it goes bad, we can tag out and go to different corners.
Yep.
No harm, no
Well,
foul. And she made more money than anybody she ever married. So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you could look at that even, you know, professionally. Like it used to be, you stayed at one job,
right.
and the focus was on, I think, more than anything, stability and that guaranteed retirement check, at the
Yes.
end of it all. So your happiness or your job satisfaction and happiness was not the highest priority, you know.
Yep.
And in talking to a lot of people under 30 right now, I've been interviewing, they're not interested in stability. They're interested in fulfillment. They're interested in meaningful contribution. So they'll change jobs as often as necessary. And they view it as, I will be a partner in this endeavor until it no longer, leaves me feeling fulfilled or needed. And then I'll move on. And it's nothing personal. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's just that I'm clear on what's important to me that I receive from work and who I work with receives from me. So that's very different paradigm that you operate under, you know?
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting. I mean, you get married when you're 22. When you're 42, you are not the same person at all. Neither of you are. So,
Well, Ken, to your point, um, I think most biologists will agree that your brain is not even done forming until you're 25. So we're
yeah, yeah,
asking
25 or
children,
26. Yeah. Yep.
we're asking children to make adult decisions, and then we're kind of like don't understand why they don't work.
Yeah. And
How'd you
how
make this?
often,
Yeah, you made me feel good. Now I don't feel good
yeah,
anymore. Bye.
and you're raising children together, and it turns out that was the focal point, and then they leave, and now
Yeah.
you're looking at each other and you're realizing, we don't have much reason to be together anymore, you
Right.
know. Some people, I mean, I know of one friend who's very, very comfortable being alone. He has no desire, he has friendships, and he has no desire to have a marital partnership anymore. And
Right.
it's he's not bitter, he's not angry, just clear. Likes being alone, likes having his own space, likes his social environment that he's in. Is has wonderful relationships with his ex and his kids. It's just the choice.
Yes.
So so it's interesting how, you got to wonder if we're just in a place where, each generation, the way they view and prioritize things has shifted. So that's shifted kind of behaviors, whether it's around, frequency of changing partners or changing careers or whatever it is, you know, it's
Yeah. A lot
it's
of those under
fascinating.
a lot of those under 30s say, "Why would I get married? It's probably going to end up in a divorce. We'll just live together." And it seems to work. And I know people who have been living together, not married for 15, 18 years. Why would I want to get
Yeah.
married? What's in that
Yeah.
for me? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And then they may, 10 years later, they may realize, oh, now things have shifted. Now I see that, you know? So yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And, you'll hear people from, like I would talk to people who were, in their, say, their 50s, and
yeah,
they had concern over people in their 30s who had already changed jobs many times. And
right.
their concern was about their perspective of what stability was and how are they ever going to collect a pension? How are they going to, like, it's not a real job if it doesn't have benefits. It's like, well, the majority of companies now, there's no benefits. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not affordable. So, but they have this lens, and it's not a judgment. It's a lack of understanding of how their values differ from the ones that, kind of dictated the trajectory of their choices in their life. So then you have a disconnect,
Right.
and if there isn't a healthy level of curiosity, if it's, you're going to end up alone if you're not married by the time you're 30. You're going to regret not having kids. That's a pronouncement, a statement being placed on someone who you don't have no concept of why they're making the choices they're making and what best choices are for them, you know?
Well,
So
you're
of
making
course
a
you're going to have
really
tension.
you're making a really strong point. And as I was talking about, the people who view a community like a group of
Mhm.
people that hasn't had kids or gotten married by the time they're 30, blah blah blah. Finish the sentence any way you want to. But that, as you said, it's a dictum or a pronouncement or something that's coming from people who are non-participants in that particular game. They're not
Yeah.
people who have any skin in that game. They're not, other than maybe they want things to go well for a loved one who happens to be
Mhm.
younger. But I'll tell you what, I've seen exactly the opposite happen too, of people who at the end of their 20s have said, yeah, we had to get a divorce. I love her too much to keep going through what we were going through. And they go on the
Mhm.
rest of their lives not living together, being better partners than when they were. And the neat part of all of that is that if people didn't have to take into consideration conforming to some other, virtual view of what their life should look like, can you even imagine how fulfilled people could be and how willing they would be to have totally functional social relationships and
Mhm.
not have to go through this mental process of wondering and worrying. And it just reminds me of a meme that I saw on Facebook. When I was 20, I was really concerned about what other people thought about me. When I was 40, um, I didn't care what people thought about me. And now that I'm 60, I know they probably weren't thinking about me at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. You know, well, and it's funny because it's interesting. I guess in the end, if we circle all the way back to community and partnerships, if there's a way to recognize that no one fits your view of what that is, and all there really is a bunch of people who are loosely held together by some core, and whether it's like we talked about geographic or a hobby or a profession or, an ideal, whatever it is, but it's loose. And the reality of it is if you're if you're engaging in judgment or some kind of pronouncement on the things that don't look the way you thought they should look. I mean, going back to the kids thing, you see the opposite. Someone who's 30 who's like, they're crazy. They already have two kids. Their life is over. They're not going to be able to backpack into all these things. And those people are so fulfilled by their life being centered around their children. There's true joy in that. But
Yes.
they're judging, instead of saying, wow, I don't value that, and you do. That's interesting. Tell me about that. I'm curious, so it's this. I think in the end, it's funny. We always talk about, at the end, it's openness, curiosity, and communication that kind of unlocks the doorways towards recognizing the community that's there. It's there whether you see it or not. It's all around you. It's
Yes.
just how connected are you to it, and that's gonna be based on how open or closed you are, you know?
And then you also get to see that there is no community. It's,
Yeah. At
it's
the
a
same
hundred
time,
per,
yeah.
it's 100%, like the Matrix, where the little guru kid says, you know, don't try to bend the spoon because that's impossible.
Yeah.
Better that you understand that it is you that needs to bend.
It's funny,
And
Deepak Chopra, I think it was in Ageless Body, Timeless Mind,
yeah,
the audiobook I listened to years ago, and he was saying, always remember we're 99.9% space. We're just these particles that are vibrating fast enough that it appears that we're solid and we're not, you know,
yes,
not on a quantum level,
yes.
So you're right. It's like it's all, in a sense, it's this paradox of it being true, but also being an illusion in large extent. So yeah, communities are definitely that as well. They're not really solid, but they can
Yeah,
appear to be.
100%. And then what you find is that they are actually created in language and conversation. Like, for
Mm,
instance, what holds Christians together is, either the Nicene or the Apostles' Creed, and the Lord's Prayer. Those things said over and over by people all across the world in whatever
mhm,
language that they choose to express it, they have that in common,
mhm,
and so that community gets created in the moment that it's being spoken, in the moment that it's being created. So, like the world that you and I are talking about right now, the world where it works,
mhm.
uh, there's going to be a whole lot of well, not that, and not that, and well, that
Right.
no, that seems to no, but it's not that. And as you go along, what you start to find is that at some point the intellectual aspect of it just needs to go and recede away, and that you just need to be present and enjoy the moment that you're in fully and 100% present, and really getting the most curious, valuable experience you possibly can. And if you can do that, even 20 or 30% of your day, you will lead a life that is really, really full of a lot of goodies, as opposed to the people who do not have the intention of being present, do not have the intention of being curious, do not have the intention of communicating at a level where they seek and get understanding, as opposed to making points, as opposed to being right, as opposed
Mhm.
to dominating, or being dominated. No, when you move out of all of that sort of stuff and you just get interested in what does community look like? No answers.
Mm.
Let's go and investigate that a little bit. Let's go see if we can create some. Let's whip some community up out of nothing and see what we come up with.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of when you and I used to lead the CAN networking meetings, and we
Mhm.
would just you and I and Carl, and we would just bring a topic up that has something to do with how people relate to themselves or to others, and then kind of tie that back into the whole notion of networking, and then
Mhm.
allowed people to just say what was on their mind about that, and how do you feel in those circumstances, and what's your goal when you're in that circumstance. And in doing that, somebody else would invariably stand on the shoulders of that comment and add more, and it just became a
Yeah.
very rich
Yep.
rich conversation, as
Yeah.
opposed to being lectured to, like, step one, do this, step two, do this, step
Right.
three, do this.
Right. Conversational learning.
Yeah, allow people to experience what you're talking about in the conversation you're having.
It's funny. I was just last night. I was working with someone who's they're working on a corporate kind of a wellness course and talking a little bit about stress and how we relate to it and that kind of thing. And he was talking about either you have a habituated response where you activate your parasympathetic nervous system or you activate your sympathetic nervous system. So for some people, when something happens, they go into an active mode, fight or flight. They attack it, they try to run away from it, and
Yep.
others try to process it, the sympathetic. They try to breathe, they try to understand. And what's interesting, it'd be an interesting experiment to recognize in yourself what is your go-to, because that would inform you a lot as to how you're going to deal. Because really, I mean, when everything's going well, when the team is winning, it's easy to have community because there's no crisis. But
Yes.
when the crisis comes up, how have you conditioned yourself to respond? So and if someone's conditioned themselves to respond, so let's look at martial arts, for example. If there are some of them, they're very action oriented. They have to be fighters because the world is dangerous and they have to be ready to respond instantly with violence, right? So my mentor was the exact opposite. He said, the world has the potential to be dangerous, and my role is to move through the world in a way where I don't invite that danger to manifest itself. So if you saw these two martial artists, one's walking through you know, alert, looking like they're ready to kick your butt if you mess with them.
Yeah.
My mentor walked through the world with a smile, relaxed. You would have no clue. You met him. You'd never know how dangerous that man was, because
Smiling
everywhere
eyes.
he
Yes.
went, he engaged people in conversation. He was relatable. He left a wake of calmness and peace behind him. So, and it wasn't that the potential wasn't there. It was his nervous system was habituated in a way that helped create ripple effects of a certain type of response. Other people, you hear about them all the time. It seems like everywhere they go, they're getting in a fight in a bar or whatever. And, and a lot of that is the way they've trained themselves to respond to potential, and they're manifesting it to a large degree. Others, it seems like wherever they go, things just kind of go easy and more relaxed and calm. They have a different relationship with those stresses, the tension, than the other person. So wouldn't that be interesting to know and also learn about the people around you in your partnerships and communities? Which the ones who are triggered, it's fight or flight. It's not personal. It's they want to throw a rock at it or they want to run away from it because that's what they know to do. And then others, you're expecting them to do something, and they're like, whoa, 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 slow down. I have some questions. Let's calm down. It's like, but we got to go. It's like, no, 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 that's not the world they live in. So, and again, it's nothing personal. It's just, they have a different way of interacting, you know?
Sure. Yeah. There's a psychological chain that's called uh, the triggering process, right? Which basically there is a trigger, then there's a thought, then there's an action, and then there's a consequence. And those are the
Mhm.
four stages. And there is always a consequence. But most people spend no time in that little in between of the thought, and that thought can, you can change it so that you actually have first the trigger, which we don't vote on. We're just wired a particular
Right.
way. And
Yeah.
then
Yep.
and then you can have this new step called emotion, and then the thought. So you can then have that judgment that you're talking about. Is this me at my highest and best? Or is there a possibility here that I'm missing something
Yeah.
before you take the action and you build the consequence for yourself? But
Mhm.
having a goal that the consequence always is love, like the Dalai Lama, the answer to
Mhm.
every question is yes, and the key to every problem is love, right? And the Dalai Lama considers it a failure to be angry. It's a failure to be because it's the antithesis of love. It's the absence.
Mhm.
Anger is the absence of love. And there's this whole thing, that Einstein's theory of there can only be one place, in the universe at one time, and only one thing can occupy that space. So that's one of the fundamental theories, that we operate to when we think of physics. Well, it works also for thinking. You can't have two thoughts at the same time. It may seem like the two thoughts are occurring simultaneously, but it is binary. It's either what it is
Right.
or it's something else.
It's an O
And
or a one. Yeah.
exactly. And we do that 80 to 90,000 times a day. So it really does seem like we have multiple things that we're thinking at the same time. But all of that said, if you just create this pause, for the emotion to show up before you immediately take the action, and then you make a decision through thinking about it, and then you can either choose to take an action, or one of the best actions is to do nothing at all,
Mhm.
and that almost never
Yeah.
comes up to somebody whose training says when this happens you do that. And
Right.
guess what? It more often looks like in life what that step is when it's not present at all. It's like he who is good with a hammer thinks everything's a nail, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So the neat part of everything we're talking about today is conversations that are intended to get a rise out of you or make you emotionally react to something, so that you get triggered, have the thought, which is what's your reaction going to be? How am I going to respond to this? The fight or the flight or something else? And then taking the action and then enjoying that consequence. And most of the
Mhm.
time, if the thinking part is not engaged, having the thought is not engaged to make a decision at that point, then you're doomed to have the same consequence over and over again and never know why.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's not an intention behind it because you're right. I
Yes,
mean, like if you want motivate if you're motivated to work out by watching Rocky and you watch it to be stimulated, then that's helpful. But if Rocky comes on and it makes you want to go out and punch someone in the face, there is just no intention behind it. The movie's the movie.
yes,
You know,
exactly.
it's just the way your reference base with yourself and how you experience it is what's gonna, determine the consequence, I guess.
Yeah, and the neat thing, just to set your mind all at ease, it was Liz Taylor I was talking about.
Oh,
And
right.
yes,
Yep. Yeah,
yes,
there you go.
Eric, I was so engaged in the present that I didn't even care whether or not, you guys knew who I was talking about anyway. And beautiful, lovely woman, marvelous life. And who cares how she lived her life? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like we all get to do what we get to do. And as much as we care about other people in moments, like fleeting
Mhm.
moments at a time, we spend most of our time apart, and each of us
Mhm.
gets to go on our own track. And what if you have a chance to create a slightly different track today than yesterday? And a slightly different track tomorrow than from today. And that comes from utilizing the gray matter and becoming more curious, becoming
Mhm.
more present, and using your communication to make things work intentionally. Start out, with that being the roadmap. Where are we going? The intention is to make the world a better place today and tomorrow. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts to wrap up, my friend?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot. This was good, as always.
100%. I love spending time with you. And I don't remember the last time I saw you. I guess I do remember the last time I saw you in person was when we went out to celebrate our 100th uh, podcast.
Yeah.
That was fantastic. Anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention and thank you for channeling Liz Taylor back to me so that I could wrap that up and not leave it hanging on a cliff.
Close
But
the
in,
loop, right?
But in the meantime, do yourself a favor, light a candle, cast a pebble into the pond, make the world work, to the extent it's possible for you to do it, and enjoy the fruits of that labor. Until next time, be well and be safe.
Bye bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.